The 7th century marked a great change across the Indian subcontinent. The old large empires, like that of Emperor Harsha, were fading away. In their place, a new kind of power began to grow. Big landowners and powerful warriors started to appear in many different regions. These men were not emperors, but they were strong in their own lands. They built small armies and controlled local resources. The existing kings often saw these new leaders as important allies. They needed their support to rule their vast kingdoms effectively. This was the beginning of a new chapter in India's long and complex story, a time when power was not held by one, but by many. These new regional leaders were often called Samanthas. A Samantha was a subordinate ruler, someone who served a more powerful king or overlord. Imagine a grand court filled with these proud Samanthas, each one a king in his own right, but all bowing before a greater emperor. This system worked for a time, but as these Samanthas grew stronger and wealthier, they started to dream of having their own independent kingdoms. They started to think, why should I serve? Why can't I be the one who is served? The path from a Samantha to a king was a difficult but tempting one. When the main king or the central empire became weak, these ambitious Samanthas saw their chance. They would declare their independence, refusing to send gifts or soldiers anymore. They would adopt grand titles for themselves, like Maharaja Adhiraja, which means Great King, Overlord of Kings, or Tribhuvana Chakravartin, meaning Lord of the Three Worlds. These titles showed everyone that they were no longer just local chiefs. They were now the supreme rulers of their own domains, ready to build their own dynasties and carve their own legacies into the history of the land. For centuries, one city held a special place in the hearts of Indian kings, Kanauji. Located in the fertile Gangetic plains, Kanauji was a symbol of power and prestige. Controlling this city meant controlling the rich trade routes and the vast agricultural wealth. It was like holding the crown jewel of the entire subcontinent. In the early medieval period, a long and fierce conflict began for control of this prized city. This epic power struggle lasted nearly 200 years. The tripartite struggle. Tripartite, involving three parties: the Gurjara Pratiharas from the west, the Palas from the east, the Rashtrakutas from the south, the Deccan. Each dynasty was powerful, with strong armies and ambitious rulers. They saw Kanauji as the key to ruling Aryavarta, northern India. The struggle was a series of battles and campaigns. A king would march his army hundreds of miles, capture the city, celebrate his victory, only to be driven out a few years later by one of his rivals. South of the Vindhya mountains in the vast Deccan plateau rose a formidable power, the Rashtrakutas. Originally, they were subordinate chiefs, or Samanthas, serving the Chalukya kings of Karnataka. In the mid-8th century, a Rashtrakuta chief, Dantidurga, challenged his overlords. Ambitious and militarily skilled, he gathered his forces. In a swift, decisive campaign, he overthrew the Chalukya king. Dantidurga then established the Rashtrakuta dynasty, creating an empire that dominated the Deccan for over 200 years and shaped northern Indian politics. To legitimize his rule, he performed a special ritual. The ceremony was called Hiranyagarbha, the Golden Womb. A Brahmin priest guided the king through symbolic rites. The ceremony showed his rebirth as a Kshatriya. It declared to the world he was now a rightful king, blessed by the gods. After the ritual, he was no longer a rebel chief, but a sovereign monarch. The Rashtrakutas produced notable rulers after Dantidurga: Govinda III, Amoghavasha. They expanded the empire and patronized art and literature, especially the rock-cut Kailasa temple at Ellora. They were the southern power in the tripartite struggle. In the arid lands of western India, in what is today Rajasthan and Gujarat, another powerful dynasty emerged, the Gurjara Pratiharas. The word Pratihara means doorkeeper or guardian. They saw themselves as guardians of India's western frontiers, protecting the heartland from invasions. Their origins are shrouded in legend. One story: Harichandra, a learned Brahmin, married a Kshatriya princess. Their sons founded the Pratihara dynasty. The legend and the Hiranyagarbha ritual helped claim noble warrior lineage. The Gujara Pratiharas rose to prominence in the 8th century, around the same time as the Palas and the Rashtrakutas. Key rulers, Nagabhata II, Mihira Bhoja. Under them, the Pratihara kingdom became a vast empire, main western contender in the tripartite struggle, often ruling from Kanauji. Their cavalry rode strong horses from Central Asia and Arabia, making them among the best in India. This gave an advantage on the flat northern plains, allowing rapid movement and hard strikes. King Mihira Bhoja, 9th century, was perhaps their greatest emperor, a devout Vishnu devotee who adopted the title Adivaraha. Coins from his time bear this title. Under him, the realm was peaceful and prosperous, and he was known as a just, powerful protector. But constant wars took a toll. By the 10th century, their power declined. Their Samanthas, like the Chandelas and the Chauhans, began asserting independence. The cycle repeats. A dynasty rises and dominates, then slowly fragments, paving the way for new powers. While the Pratiharas guarded the west, the Pala dynasty rose to power in the eastern regions of India, primarily in Bengal and Bihar. Around the middle of the 8th century, the region of Bengal was in a state of chaos and anarchy. This period of lawlessness was known as Matsya Nyaya, the law of the fish, where the big fish eat the small fish. To put an end to this chaos, the different chiefs came together. They elected a man named Gopala to be their king. This peaceful and democratic choice was rare for its time. Gopala restored order and laid the foundation for a dynasty that would rule for about 400 years. His son Dharmapala and his grandson Devapala were the most powerful rulers of the Pala dynasty. They were ambitious kings who expanded the kingdom into a vast empire. Dharmapala was the eastern champion in the tripartite struggle. He even managed to capture Kanauj for a brief period and placed his own chosen ruler on its throne. The Palas turned Bengal from a fragmented region into the center of a mighty empire. The Pala kings were not just great warriors, they were also great patrons of religion and learning. They were devout Buddhists at a time when Buddhism was declining in other parts of India. The most famous of their foundations was the Somapura Mahavihara, in what is now Bangladesh. They also supported the famous university at Nalanda, which attracted students and scholars from all over Asia. The Palas helped preserve and promote Buddhist thought, art and culture, leading to a distinct Pala school known for elegant bronze and stone statues. Under the Palas, Eastern India enjoyed stability and prosperity, with strong maritime links to Southeast Asia. The Palas show that a kingdom's greatness is measured by cultural and intellectual contributions, as much as by victory. Well, you know, their legacy really endures. How do we know so much about these ancient kings, their battles, and their achievements? One of the most important sources of information for historians are inscriptions known as prashastis. A prashasti is a special kind of inscription, usually written in Sanskrit, that praises the king. They were often composed by learned Brahmins or court poets. These were not just simple records of events. They were carefully crafted literary works designed to present the king in the most glorious light possible. Valiant, victorious, godlike, a protector of his people and a conqueror of his enemies. These prashastis were often engraved on stone pillars, temple walls, and copper plates so that the king's fame would last forever. Imagine a traveler arriving at a grand temple and seeing a long inscription detailing the heroic deeds of the ruler who built it. The text would often contain a genealogy, tracing the king's family back to mythical heroes or gods. It would list his military victories, describing the kingdoms he conquered and the kings he defeated. While these accounts were often exaggerated, they still provide valuable clues about the political landscape of the time. To get a more balanced picture, historians compare the prashastis of rival kings, Palas and Pratiharas alike, to piece together a more accurate version of events. For example, the Gwalior Prashasti of King Mihira Bhoja gives a detailed account of his ancestors and their achievements. Well, that is, these inscriptions really matter. As the great empires of the tripartite struggle began to weaken and fragment, a new and powerful force emerged from the northwest. This was Sultan Mahmud of Ghazni, the ruler of a small kingdom in what is now Afghanistan. Mahmud was an ambitious and ruthless military commander. His main goals were to build a grand and wealthy capital in Ghazni and to expand his empire in Central Asia. To fund these ambitions, he looked towards the rich temple towns and kingdoms of northern India. Between 1000 and 1027, Mahmud launched a series of devastating raids into the subcontinent. Mahmud's campaigns were not aimed at conquering and ruling India. He was primarily a raider. His strategy was to sweep in with his fast-moving army, attack a wealthy city or temple, plunder its treasures, and then return to Ghazni. He targeted famous temple towns like Mathura, Kanauj, and Somnath Temple. Mahmud's attacks were brutal and destructive, exposing the weakness of fragmented kingdoms and inflicting deep material and psychological blows. He also commissioned al-Biruni, whose Kitab-ul-Hind remains a remarkable source on India's science, religion, and society. Mahmud's raids marked a turning point, weakening northern powers and opening the way for future, more permanent invasions from Central Asia. After the decline of the great empires and the disruption caused by Mahmud's raids, northern India became a mosaic of smaller Rajput kingdoms. Among them, the Chauhans, the Chahamanas, rose to prominence. They ruled from Shakambari, near modern Ajmer. They began as Samanthas of the Gurjara Pratiharas. As the Pratihara Empire weakened, the Chauhans declared independence. They expanded rapidly, fighting neighbors to assert supremacy. The Chalukyas of Gujarat, the Gahadavalas of Kannauj, the dynasty's most famous ruler, Prithviraj Chauhan. Prithviraj III. He ascended the throne around 1177. A charismatic and powerful military leader. His name entered legend, most famously in the Prithviraj Rasa, portraying him as romantic, heroic, the epitome of Rajput chivalry. He expanded his realm to include Delhi and Ajmer. Delhi rose in importance under his rule. His court was a cultural hub, patronizing poets and scholars. His campaigns against Indian rivals were largely successful, consolidating power in northern India. He embodied Rajput martial pride. His kingdom blocked the path of any future northwest invasions. The stage was set for a decisive confrontation over northern India. The story of Prithviraj is the story of an era facing its greatest challenge. As we have seen, the map of India from the 7th to the 12th century was in a constant state of flux. It was an age defined not by one single dominant empire, but by dynamic and often violent competition between powerful regional kingdoms. The era began with the rise of ambitious Samanthas, who carved out their own domains. They adopted grand titles. They performed elaborate rituals. They built magnificent courts to declare sovereignty. Power was no longer centralized. It was a prize to be fought for and defended. The tripartite struggle for Kannauj stands as the central drama. The Gurjara Pratiharas in the west, the Palars in the east, the Rashtrakutas in the Deccan. Their epic rivalry showcased immense power, but also led to decline and a power vacuum. Out of fragmentation rose fierce Rajput kingdoms, among them the Chauhans. Historians read Prashastis carefully to reconstruct a clearer truth. The raids of Mahmud of Ghazni exposed political disunity and drained wealth, a prelude to a more permanent change. The era of regional Hindu kingdoms, which had defined the subcontinent for 500 years, was drawing to a close under figures like Prithviraj Chauhan. The next invader from the northwest, Muhammad Ghauri, came not just to raid, but to conquer and to rule. In the next part of Uncovering History, we will discuss Muhammad Ghauri, the battles of Tarain, and the great southern kingdoms like the Cholas.